I'm sure we've all had the experience of like using an agent and telling it to do something and it does something you don't want it to do. I want the agents to be able to be making the right decisions and doing the things that I expect them to do. It is like wearing rocket boots. And if you're wearing rocket boots, you really had better hope that you're pointed in the right direction. I'm Dave Kirk. Thank you for coming. And today I'd like to talk to y'all about sort of how we are approaching Agentic PR review at Wayve and sort of more generally how we're approaching agents and agent workflows. So briefly about me, I started programming 21 years ago. Has anyone in here written Linden scripting language before? Excellent. Very good. Very good. I've been doing DevOps since 2015 and have been with Wayve since 2024. Primarily started in the DevOps area, building dev tooling, all the VMs that our nerds use. This guy and a couple of my teammates. But for the past 6 or 7 months, I've been working on our effort to adopt agentic AI across the organization. So today what we're going to be talking about is sort of what are the underlying motivations behind our approach for how we're building agentic code review. Then some of the specifics about the mechanics of how we're actually approaching it. And then as well, how we have been evaluating our agent to make sure that the code review is good. Now, I want to start off with a little complaint, which is that I find that one of the more frustrating things, one of the more challenging things, and kind of, for me, surprising things in the industry, is that with the adoption of agents, I mean, I suppose it makes sense. It's decently vibes-based, but one of the hard parts right now is making sure, do the agents actually work? Are the agents actually doing the thing that you want them to do? You know, I don't really care too much about how many different MCP servers it can use or what tools it can use if I don't have confidence that it's going to be using those things well. I'm sure we've all had the experience of like using an agent and telling it to do something and it does something you don't want it to do. Making sure that it doesn't do that in high-stakes environments, especially if you've got a 2-ton car driving near me when I'm cycling down the street, I want the agents to be able to be making the right decisions and doing the things that I expect them to do. I have a coworker who has used my favorite metaphor for agents, which is that it is like wearing rocket boots. And if you're wearing rocket boots, you really had better hope that you're pointed in the right direction. So I had a lot of this was influenced by my experience with using Claude multi-agent teams, which for anyone who's not familiar, sort of the way that that works is you've got a top-level agent that you give tasks to, and then that agent delegates tasks to other sub-agents that you have defined with prompts. Really, really impressive stuff. I mean, like, it was really, really cool. And, you know, I could just leave it running in the background and it would just kind of build stuff. And it was also not great in a lot of ways. Granted, this was my first time building this, but I did have to write an article internally and share it for educational purposes for the rest of the organization about how I spent $1,600 in 2 days of Claude usage. It was hard, you know. I set up the classic, like, top-level agent, and then some to implement the tickets, some to QA the tickets, and then another one to handle all the merge conflicts and everything. And they kept on getting confused about what their roles were. They kept on taking all of the wrong actions. And the hard part was that when I wanted to improve things, I didn't have great visibility into whether or not the changes that I was making were helpful. Would adding another agent at this layer be helpful on the outcomes? I needed more information to be able to know. I even built a bunch of dashboards and tools and stuff. I've actually gone through 2 different iterations of this that I've built for myself to try to build like multi-agent software development factories. And it's a challenging thing. And I really came to conclude like observability is critical. If you can't, let alone, don't even get me talking about multi-agents, if you can't even observe a single agent, you're gonna really struggle to make a reliable, production-ready agent workflow. And it's because they're unreliable and they're stochastic. Like we're familiar with writing software and building workflows that are relatively easy to predict, especially compared to agents. And then alignment is a difficult challenge. Not only the challenge of, is the agent going to do the thing that you told it to do, but also, did you tell it the thing that you want it to do? These are very, very difficult things. You need to really understand the impact of the changes that you make. If you modify the agents.md, is that modification helpful? If you have read an article about a cool new MCP endpoint that gives your agents memory and allows all of your agents across your organization to all have memory that's shared, is that helpful on the outcomes, or is that just burning more tokens? You need evidence to be able to conclude this, because we're humans, we're all susceptible to confirmation bias. And if you are working on a project related to agents, you have strong incentives to think that the actions that you're taking to make your agent better are making it better. And you really do need evidence to not rely purely, or at least, in my opinion, too heavily on vibes. Yeah, mature adoption of agents, it really, really requires understanding their behavior and the actions that they're taking. So that gets me to Agentic code review here at Wayve. We're working on self-driving cars. We're not trying to pull humans out of the code review process. We're trying to extend the capabilities of humans in the code review process, identify areas that the humans are missing out on, catch the obvious things, catch the complex things that humans miss out on. And then really, really, really importantly, we want to be able to improve that code review process through data that we collect on that code review, on the outcomes of that code review process. And as well, this is meant to be a trailblazer project, sort of setting out best practices and how we want to approach agent workflows more generally at Wayve. This is meant to serve as an example of a feedback loop for improving agent behavior. And we were considering going with off-the-shelf offerings, but I mean, honestly, as these agents have gotten better, the benchmarks are becoming more and more difficult to trust in a meaningful way. And as well, I don't know if the contents of the public benchmarks really reflect the nature of my code base. In relevance to the public benchmarks not necessarily being trustworthy, this came from a Cursor article that they wrote where they found that if they put Opus 4.8 Max under a harness that really, really heavily restricted how much it would be hypothetically able to cheat, they identified a lot of ways that it cheated on these benchmarks. They found that if they prevented these obvious ways of cheating, performance drops way down. And in fact, most of the performance on this benchmark from 4.6 Max to 4.8 Max was just the agent figuring out how to cheat better. And that's impressive, but that's not exactly what I'm looking for. So another priority as well is steerability. I'm sure I had the experience quite a bit that I would ask the agent for suggestions on how I can improve the code in my branch, simplify it, make it better, etc. And every single time that I would ask it to do that, it would give me feedback. And I'm sort of suspicious of you here, Claude. At some point, you got to be fibbing a little. And we want to reduce the noise. We want to make sure if you have something that is always giving you feedback, a lot of that feedback isn't going to be great, and then you're going to learn to not read that feedback. So we need a really high signal to noise ratio. And as well, tokens are getting expensive. We want to make sure that we're spending our money efficiently and effectively. And as well, our code base is complex. Building self-driving cars, we've got robotics engineers, we've got ML engineers, data scientists, full stack web developers, DevOps. We have so many different things that we need to deal with, and we have a lot of very domain-specific implementations. So a lot of this is built around steering the behavior of the agent based on the code that changed. Our employees will define prompts that will guide the feedback that the agent leaves, and then based upon what files changed, we will leave feedback, and you run one agent per prompt, which, hey look, it's a GitHub action that I took a screenshot of. This is a flowchart that I think is genuinely beautiful of how we have implemented our code review. So you open up your PR. We just run it when it is opened and in draft, and when you transition it from draft to not ready for review. That's what it's called. And that's mostly just because like if we ran this on every push, I mean, boy, yeah, we would churn through that Series D money real fast. So then we run the GitHub action. It evaluates what prompts to run. We fan out across a bunch of different agents. And then to steer the agent, we have a common skill that defines the mechanics of how it should leave the feedback. And then for each of we inject each of those different prompts into the prompt that we give to the agent. It leaves feedback, and then we report metrics. So this is an example of one of our review prompts. And this is actually kind of neat. With this approach, you can do, this is a very, very trivial example, but you can do like interesting things with it. At the top, we are A/B testing different reasoning or effort levels for the model that we're using. The prompt here, it's basically just we have some quirks in our infrastructure, and if you're modifying these certain pieces of infrastructure, you need to run the Terraform apply in the right spot. So now if you modify that infrastructure, the agent will comment on the PR and remind you of that fact. And then at the bottom, we select which files cause this prompt to run. And also, you can set the percentage of how often this will run. If you're creating a prompt that is going to be running in a section of the code base that is modified a lot, you can set it to a lower percentage probability of running in order to reduce the noise that you're creating while you are collecting data on how good this prompt is. So yeah, the feedback loop. This is like a very, very important thing. We want to be able to improve our prompts. We want to see the areas in which we incorrectly defined the prompts and where, when given this prompt, an agent is making a common, frequent mistake that we can then prevent it from doing again in the future. So we do that through just basic sentiment, thumbs up and thumbs down emojis. You can also leave comments, which is incredibly helpful for then iterating on and improving the prompts. And then as well, we have an agent that after you merge, looks at each individual piece of feedback that was left and tries to evaluate whether or not that feedback was actually used. So we get both sentiment of whether or not it was good or bad, and we also get information on whether or not it was actually used. And then as well, we have a skill for improving the prompts. Agents are really, really good at looking at tons of data and then pulling out sort of common themes. So whenever we've collected enough data on one of these prompts that we're using for evaluating some section of the code base, we will kick off a skill to look at all of those instances of the feedback being left and whether or not it was used to try to extract common themes and then improve the prompt. You need a good amount of data for this. We are still in the relatively early days, but we have been seeing like this works, and it has led to, at the very least, and I'll get to some more detail about this in a minute, but at the very least, the sentiment line goes up and the usage line goes up. So at the very least, this works for making those lines go up. So yeah, we collect the sentiment, thumbs up, thumbs down, and we compare it to try to get an idea of whether or not it's good. I was thinking it'd be neat to compare it against a baseline of just telling GPT 5.3 Codex, make suggestions to make the PR better. If I ask it to make the PR better, how useful is that compared to putting the time and effort to actually defining a real prompt? And we have actually had some prompts that are meaningfully better. The hard part is that the baseline of this, it kind of just provides feedback that people like. And I think that this started to unpeel the serious limitation that exists with just sentiment and the serious limitation with boiling down something so complex to a single metric that, like, whether or not you like it is not really telling you how useful is this feedback, or is this covering something that a human would have missed, or other things like that. We can track this across different modes. So whether we're commenting top level on the first page of a GitHub pull request, or in line with like a specific line of code. Generally, it's pretty much the same overall, but there are some prompts that people prefer that do a better job with top level comments versus inline, and then we can compare across different models. Yeah, here you go. For this prompt, much better sentiments for the inline comments versus the top level. And then interestingly, this one, maybe as interesting. But we want to know for all of these different prompts, like that prompt that I showed you earlier of, hey, if this file is modified, remind the user of this. You don't need extra high effort for that. But something like one of our security engineers put together a prompt to try to catch security issues in PRs. You want extra high effort for that. One thing that I have found interesting is that the medium effort on GPT 5.3 codecs, and now we've switched over to 5.6, the medium effort actually gets used more often, even though the extra high effort gets like better sentiment. What conclusions can I draw from that? I can try to draw some, but in reality, I need more data. Because simple metrics trivialize complex problems, and doing pull request feedback, like giving feedback on a pull request, it's a complex problem. It's nuanced. It's sophisticated. It is qualitative, and it's hard. I mean, honestly, like I don't have too many conclusions for y'all about the right way to do this sort of stuff, because the main conclusions that I've drawn from this effort is that this is hard, and you really need to put effort into evaluations and collecting the metrics to understand what your agents are doing to be confident that they are doing things well. Yeah, sentiment's not enough. I just thought this picture was funny. Yeah, I mean, is this feedback good? That doesn't tell you a huge amount. And heuristics are just heuristics, It's just telling us that people like it, which is a useful thing, but as I've said so many times, you need more. There's also, I was really on a roll today. Yeah, so we do as well. This was one that I was really psyched about, using an agent to evaluate whether or not the feedback was used. So we're collecting metrics on sentiment and whatnot, but also agent to collect metrics to evaluate the quality of the output of the other agent. And I know what you must be thinking. I hope that you are thinking this because I have a Watchmen poster on here. Who's watching the Watchmen? Well, it's called a script and a test, and we have evals. I generated a number of synthetic examples. I also scraped a number of actual pull requests and pieces of feedback that were left. Manually went through about like 50 examples. God, I would love more, but I don't have infinite time, to try to make sure that the feedback used eval agent was actually telling the truth and reliably doing so. And what was really cool that I didn't expect is I ended up doing eval-driven development, where I had the eval built before I ended up actually writing the agent to do the eval. And the friggin' eval caught issues in my prompt that was causing that eval agent to do incorrect things. Like the value of doing eval-driven development was just fantastic to me here. And it also means that we can be confident that it is pulling out truthful information. Yeah, we also have CI. If you modify this agent, it will run it against the evals and make sure that you're not making the agent worse. Yeah, like I said, conclusion, guys, it's hard. You need a lot of heuristics. You need a lot of information. You can't trivialize these complex problems down as if they are simple problems. And you need an appropriate amount of metrics and measurements to actually be able to draw meaningful conclusions, because every metric has its own truths and its own lies, and you need to aggregate them together to get that fuller picture. You can do multi-agent pipelines. It's hard though, and it again takes effort. And you really got to lean on the scientific method to move away from vibes. Yeah, lack of data leads to vibes. Vibes leads to trouble. Can you guys believe that that's on my family crest? I think so coincidental. It's like adjacent to nominative determinism. But yeah, I'd highly recommend really establish these practices for your organization if you can. The earlier on that you can establish these practices in this sort of cultural drive and understanding that you need to be scientific about this, the better of the time you're going to have. Otherwise, it's so much chance for burning a lot of tokens and having a lot of chaos. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, cool.
Thanks very much for sharing. Just because you mentioned quite a lot about sentiment, can I just for the point of clarification, are you operating on a new code base or a century-old code base where, you know, the human who developed this code base, they do have a lot of understanding of the...
This is a long-lasting code base. Yeah,
long-lasting. Right, so that's almost a similar situation that I'm in, is that sometimes I do have to trust human because like our code base is so old, and sometimes the people who developed it are the knowledge base, and right. Yeah. So how come you said sentiment, you know?
Oh, so the sentiment is evaluating, the sentiment is a user leaving feedback on the feedback that the agent gave. Yes. I always just like when someone's like, I don't need the microphone, and look at me doing it now. Yeah, so the sentiment is meant to be a signal to us to determine whether or not the feedback being left by the agent is good. So it's basically you create a PR, you open it, the agent will run against your PR and look at your code changes and provide feedback based on your code changes, and you can say that was good or that was bad. We're not like trying to take the domain expert out of it, and in fact, we really want the domain expert to come in and say, you got this wrong, agent, and here's specifically what was wrong, because then hopefully we can codify that and they won't have to, you know, deal with that same problem again. Doesn't it? Cool. Anyone else? Yeah. Oh, you got that now. Cool, all right, great. Nice.
Thank you, I enjoyed that. It's another question also related to the sentiment. So you were saying that you collect data based off the sentiment. Mm-hmm. And what I'd like to know is whether you actually use that data to modify the prompts. Okay, if that's the case, how are you objectively determining whether your team is giving sentiment that's good quality sentiment, or just trying to make their lives a bit easier in terms of the agent not criticizing them for things that they
yeah. That is such a good question, and we're not, and it's hard to do, and that is why I really like emphasize. That's why like the main lesson I've come from with this is you can't rely just on one metric like sentiment that has its own implicit flaws. Yeah, exactly as you're describing. Yeah.
Thank you.
From what you described.
Oh, you might need to hold the mic a little closer.
Okay, so from what you described, there will be a lot of decision points happening there. So is there like an audit trail that you have? Because you would not know for compliance reasons later on.
Yeah.
Who decided what?
Yeah, all of the agents' logs are being output in the GitHub Actions logs. And you know, all of its feedback that it leaves is in the GitHub comments. Honestly, that's not enough. We are currently working on getting an LLM gateway in place because I want to be auditing and logging every single turn and every action that an agent takes. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Sorry, I know there's a couple more questions, but Dave will be sticking around afterwards if you've got any more, so come and find him. We've got 2 more talks to get through, unfortunately. But yeah, thanks, Dave. Let's give him another round of applause.